This is Power Source, a podcast by the Citizens Utility Board, where we track down the answers to your utility questions. I'm your host, Hannah Finnerty. It's a hot afternoon in July, 95 degrees or something. One of those days where just moving makes you sweat. You're trying your best to keep cool, so you drop your air conditioner a few degrees or you plug in a few fans. But so does everyone else on your block. And likely, so do most people in your city. What happens as a result of this spike in electricity use is known as peak demand, or when demand for electricity is at its highest. You might not see it clearly on your bills, but you're paying more to use electricity during these peak demand times. By shifting your usage to off-peak hours, you could save money and reduce stress on the grid, which makes the power supply more reliable. On this episode of Power Source, Cubs Executive Director David Kolata joins me for a discussion about peak demand. He explains how it works, why shifting your usage is good for the planet and your pocketbook, and what programs are available to incentivize off-peak usage.
Hi, everyone. This is David Kolata. I'm the Executive Director of the Citizens Utility Board. Peak demand reduction is an issue near and dear to my heart. I'm, for example, an hourly pricing customer and saved a lot of money on that. And just from a consumer advocacy point of view, peak demand is such a huge driver of our overall costs that anything we can do through programs, through customer education, through consumer empowerment to lower that peak demand just has huge potential savings for consumers, even those who don't necessarily take advantage of those programs.
So Dave, can you explain to our listeners what peak demand is on a very basic level?
Sure. So the electricity that is allowing you to listen to this podcast now was generated a split second ago, and it could have come from anywhere really in the region. Up until very, very recently, it was cost prohibitive to store electricity. Now, we'll get to storage a little bit later on, but the basic idea here is that you have to build the whole system out to meet demand on a hot summer day. And that's what's known as peak demand. So you can think about it when air conditioners are running full blast, you have to build out your whole system to meet that highest usage. And that's why reducing peak demand can have such benefits for lowering prices for consumers, because studies have shown that even a 5% reduction in overall peak demand can result in savings of about $3 billion a year collectively for consumers. It's just because meeting that last little bit of demand is so expensive. And anything we can do to prevent that is good for your pocketbook. It's also good for the planet.
So you talk about this hot summer afternoon during the work week. Can you walk us through what that looks like when the demand is really high? What happens?
Well, what ends up happening is new power plants come online to meet that demand, and it could be anywhere. If you look at what's known as the load curve, typically it kind of looks like a little bit of a bell curve that peaks between 4 to 6 p.m. or 4 to 7 p.m. on a weekday. And it goes up quite substantially because everyone is using electricity during those hours. And so ultimately, that's a driver of a large part of what we pay on our bills. But ultimately, what it looks like is, from a consumer point of view, where it will show up is in your prices. And so the big thing is it's just way more expensive to meet peak. And it also tends to be the dirtiest resources. So you'll see diesel plants, or you'll see natural gas peaking plants come online to meet those hours when electricity demand is at its greatest.
You touched on this a little bit, but if you could just expand. You talked about, if I'm on a fixed rate with ComEd, how is using electricity during an off-peak time better than using an on-peak time if I'm getting charged the same per kilowatt hour throughout the day?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And the answer is, in the near term, Every kilowatt hour is the same if you're on our average rates. So in the near term, you'll still get, if you cut back, you'll still get those benefits. But over the course of a year, if you're on average rates, it probably doesn't make that much of a difference. However, your average rates do cover the risk, essentially, the risk premium in the cost of meeting peak demand. And so reducing at peak, even if you don't get an immediate price benefit or a price signal, reducing at peak reduces everyone's bills. So it's something in general that you should do. It's equivalent in some sense to energy efficiency. The cheapest kilowatt hour is the one you don't have to use. So if you become more efficient, you're going to lower your bill. All demand management or demand responses at the end of the day is energy efficiency that's time dependent. And it's time dependent because what you're doing is taking action to reduce peak. And that has tremendous system benefits that even folks on average rates will benefit from in the medium term.
So you talked about hourly pricing, and that is a ComEd program. And then the partner to that in Ameren territory is Power Smart pricing. There's also peak time savings and peak time rewards. What do these programs have to do with demand? Can you walk us through how each of those programs work?
Sure. They're both aimed at the same general principle, trying to send a price signal or create an incentive to lower peak demand. In the case of hourly pricing or Power Smart pricing for Ameren, it is on the energy side of the equation, the energy market. And there, it's the prices are settled every hour. It goes up and down during the course of the day. Oftentimes, it's less than 1 cent a kilowatt hour. Sometimes it gets pretty significant on a hot summer day. It may get up to 6 cents a kilowatt hour, 7 cents, sometimes even 10 cents. So it varies by the hour. So what hourly pricing is, it's just simply an energy market product that you pay the real hourly electricity price. It's a program that traditionally people on it have saved about 15%, not for everyone, but we're finding that a lot of consumers can benefit from it. It really kind of depends on how you use electricity. So for example, are you home during the weekday from 3 to 7, or is the house empty? Those types of questions. But hourly pricing, is one program that aimed at creating an incentive to reduce peak demand, and it's on the energy side. What peak time savings or peak time rewards, it is basically the same type of idea, but this is aimed at the capacity market. And what the capacity market is, it's a forward market. The goal of it is to make sure that we have enough electricity 3 years from now so that we can meet demand. So peak time rewards, peak time savings, they give you a credit if you reduce during a peak time rewards event, peak time savings event. Typically, what you owe for capacity is settled by your 5 highest usage hours of the year. And so what the goal of peak time savings is to let you know, hey, if you reduce, you're going to get a credit on your bill. And why that's a win-win for consumers is because we don't have to pay for capacity if we're not using as much on those days. So they're both aimed at creating incentives so that folks lower peak demand, basically giving you an economic incentive to reduce your usage on like a hot summer day. One is on the energy side and one is on the capacity side. Together, we think that they are extraordinarily good programs. And I think as we continue to move forward, trying to decarbonize the grid here in Illinois and do so in as cost-effective manner as we possibly can, programs like real-time pricing, like peak time rewards, like a time of use price, ways to send this information to consumers, I think, are going to become increasingly important.
So you touched on this before with the financial aspect of this, but what are some of the other benefits of shifting your usage to off-peak times?
Yeah, so there are 2 additional benefits to reducing peak demand other than just lower prices. The first would be reliability, because when you are obviously there's more electricity on the system, it can result in situations where the utility might need to build new transformers or invest in new infrastructure, and that can be costly. So there are definitely reliability benefits for reducing peak. These will often be very location dependent. So it may be only in one part of the state and not in another one part of the grid. But there are big reliability benefits from reducing peak too. And then environmental, because it turns out that the resources, the generation that needs to come online to meet the demand on, say, a hot summer day, typically it's among the dirtiest elements, most polluting elements of the fleet. You will see diesel plants come online. You'll see like oil burning. You'll see coal and natural gas. These are typically our most polluting resources. And so if you can reduce peak, you're preventing those resources from running, and that is therefore lowering overall pollution. So there are really whole systemic benefits from doing what we can to improve how the grid is operating. We want to reduce peak. We want to be efficient with how the grid is operating, and we want to ultimately optimize it. Down the line, you can see scenarios, and we're starting to see this a little bit in California, where as solar develops, you may have during the middle of the day, you may have with a situation where you actually want to encourage people to use more electricity. We're not there yet here in Illinois. For now, it's this reduction of peak, flattening of peak demand that is really essential. But overall, the world we're moving into is one where we have to be much more responsive and have much more control to make sure that electricity usage is coordinated and optimized in a way that's going to be cheapest for consumers, more reliable, and environmentally sustainable. This is something that at Cub we're working on, very closely. It's a huge priority of ours. And really, if you look across the country right now, it's a big issue in every state, because as increasingly we know we have to respond to climate change, but just in general, the expense of trying to meet new demand is very pricey. And as part of a least cost strategy, being as efficient as we can, using the programs we have, like peak time savings, like hourly pricing, like time of use pricing, these are very low cost ways to get value for consumers. And it's not just the program participants who benefit because it has this price suppressive effect on the whole system. Everyone can benefit from that.
Thank you, Dave, for breaking down the complexities of peak demand, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in. If you want to learn more about the different pricing programs, we have some informational fact sheets available on our website, www.citizensutilityboard.org. On the homepage, click on the Resources tab up at the top, select Electric, and scroll down to the section called Alternative Pricing Plans. I will also include links to the programs in the show notes below. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Power Source. Do you have a question you'd like answered on a future episode of Power Source? Send me an email at hfinnerty@citizensutilityboard.org with your question. If you have specific questions about your utility bill or service, please call Cub's Consumer Help Hotline at 1-800-669-5556. The line is open from 9 to 4, Monday through Friday. This episode of Power Source was written and produced by me, your host, Hannah Finnerty. If you liked this episode, please hit subscribe in your podcast app and visit www.citizensutilityboard.org for more information about utilities in Illinois.